I was just going to remind you, remember to applause when the applause light goes on. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Hello, welcome. So good to be with you. And those who are joining virtually, welcome into the space. And as you probably know, on the Sunday morning, this space is an open space. It's really about a heart space of deep cultivation of wisdom and insight, so that we can recognize hidden deep within the heart is this spiritual gem, this pearl of great price, which is our deepest nature and unites us with not only all of life, but with the source of life simultaneously. And so we are on this journey, whether we are conscious or unconscious of it. This journey is a journey that all life is moving towards its destination, which is also its source, from whence it came. And so we are all going at our own pace, and we can quicken or slow down this pace according to our desire and willingness. And if you're entering into this narrow gate on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, oftentimes you're making the choice to quicken your pace. And so we will help as much as we can in doing that. We'll look at teachings today ranging from Rumi to A Course in Miracles and many things in between, I'm sure. These teachings are designed to open the heart. It's really where the journey begins and ends. This, as Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, is a journey without distance. So this is a journey within the heart. And the journey is often referred to as the path, right? Capital P. And this path is referring to a way of living and thinking and acting in the world that aligns or attunes with the source of life, its qualities, its way of thinking and being, right? Basically tuning into the music or the celestial song of God and finding that rhythm within our life and expressing in a multitude of ways based within this frequency or this rhythm of your deeper soul nature, which is also the divine. And so it's about harmonizing. It's about getting all of the stuff out of our ears, quieting the inner voice, so that we can pick up this rhythm, because it's constantly being broadcast. Are we listening is the only question. And so we'll, in an attempt today to turn down the noise and make this song more and more apparent to all of us, because as this song begins again, as it says in A Course in Miracles for us, it also plugs us back into a deep-seated peace and happiness, which is what we're actually searching for in the pathways of the world. And so the path is distinguished between the way of the world. The path is the path home. The path in the world is a path of delay and unconsciousness and confusion and oblivion. And so oftentimes when we're beginning to get onto this path, we sometimes have to make these very strong disconnects or breaks or severances with some of our ways of being in the world, and who we're being with will oftentimes undergo major alteration or sometimes even severance. And so this idea of coming back home to the heart, finding this deeper rhythm, coming into a state of divine peace and knowledge, is oftentimes refused or rejected for this very reason, that most people are forgetful of the song, and as a result of getting attached and identified with the things and situations and relationships within the world, they actually have resistance to coming home. And so one of the things that you'll recognize when you begin this path with earnest is that you're going to come up against your own resistances. And so learning how to navigate and stay the course despite the challenges is one of the early lessons that we learn. Because the challenges will come, and they'll come in all different forms. And what the challenge essentially is doing underneath the surface is basically telling you to stay asleep. Don't go home. And reject your divine inheritance. And so we have to have this, like I was saying earlier, insight or discernment in beginning to see the quality of the voices that we listen to. It's a really important part here, that we no longer listen to the voices that are numbing us or distracting us or even sometimes deceiving us into destructive or difficult paths. Okay, so all of this, I think, will be borne out in our conversation this morning. I hope you enjoy the ride. Let's just begin by calming the mind and settling into an open and listening heart. So as we're settling into this deeper space, this quieter listening, this opening to divine introspection and communion, I'm actually reminded of something that Carl Jung mentions in his biography or autobiography, depending on how you look at it, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And early on, Jung, as a boy, had discerned two different personalities within himself. What he called personality number one was the personality of the normal individual in action in the world, an individual that was on a path of development and career and family, etc. The surface personality. Personality number two, as Jung describes it, is the personality of the depths, this ancient aspect of himself that knew sacred mysteries, that had a keen and direct insight into what is beyond the appearances of the world, and knew instinctually the divine mind, and was able to navigate within these deeper realms, these hidden realms. And so I would posit that we all have this dual aspect, as Jung described it within himself, that we have a surface face or personality or persona or mask, and we have another aspect of ourselves that's often occluded or hidden, and that is the personality of the depths. And so in order to access the personality of the depths, we first must make this discernment between the surface, or what Sri Aurobindo would call the frontal being, the being that's basically the puppet on the stage of physicality, and the other aspect of ourself that's actually here, bringing us here, wanting more of these divine teachings to learn of itself and open to its true nature. And so I would invite you, as you go on this journey with us this morning, to not only make the discernment between the surface personality and the personality of the depth, but that you would actually acclimate your attention into the personality of the depth. Okay? Because it's really the only way that we can understand these teachings. If we stay at the surface level and hear and listen and think from the personality on the surface, all of this can be interesting and intellectually stimulating, but that's usually where it will stop. And none of these metaphors, or as the Sufis would describe the teaching, these unveilings will matter to us, because we will stay at the surface and not allow the inner doorway of the heart to open so that we can explore the depth. If we identify as the surface personality, we will stay the surface personality and nothing will change. In fact, it's, back to this idea that we can hear these teachings for years and years as the surface personality, and it's really just dead letters. It's just empty talk. Because if we are not opening to the doorway of the heart and allowing this deepening of our own nature, we will never taste the sweetness of God. We'll never enter into the living communion of the divine presence. And that's really at the core or essence of our human life. And so the invitation is, be who you are. Open to your own depth this morning. And as we do this, we go up in frequency, if you can see it in terms of vibration. We talked about this a little bit last week. If you were to look at consciousness as Dr. David Hawkins had laid it out, it's calibrated according to a certain frequency range, where the lower the vibration, the smaller the shutter that you can look through. Right? So if you're in blame and shame and guilt and depression, the eye of your mind is very small and closed. It's not widened. It's not bright. And when the mind's eye is closed, what you're getting is fantasies. The mind is blind. It's not seeing. It's conjuring. And so we think we see what we see, but it's not really there. What's there are our own beliefs, our own opinions, our magic, our conjuring. As we go up the scale, according to David Hawkins, we open that shutter of the mind. It begins to get brighter and wider, and we begin to discern things in more of its vibrational and natural nature. And as the mind begins to widen, we become less and less identified as the separate little self, and we begin to come to a place of the depths. We begin to wake up in a new way of thinking and being. And so the reason why I bring that up here is because these teachings are meeting you where you are, wherever that may be, but they're not leaving you there. If you have this desire or aspiration to ascend, they will take you as far as you can manage, as high as you can manage or want to go. But if you're reluctant and resistant, they're not going to force or command or, insist that you change. But notice where you are. So one of the things that will give us insight into how we approach these teachings, at certain stages along this vertical path, our minds will open enough to allow these teachings to come in. But oftentimes it's still within this dualism of us versus them. And so when we take on a spiritual path or a religious belief system, it's usually, okay, so we have the truth and nobody else has it. Or they have it, but it's not complete. And so we have these divisions within our thinking that are preventing us at certain stages to recognizing that there's really a unity, and only a unity in all of life. And so as we approach our teachings this morning, this idea of unity is going to be first and foremost as the foundation of who we are. That divisions are illusions, okay? And Rumi has a beautiful way of saying it, where if you can think of it in terms of God's breath. So what's going on is at the very top of that spectrum that we were talking about, God breathes. And this breath animates all of life from the highest to the lowest. And if our attention is turned towards ego identification, body identification, we see only the outer forms. And so we see the animating life of each individual, from insect to human to stars. But we call them by names, and we make these artificial divisions that have us actually miss the animating breath that's behind the appearance. And so this in Islam or in Sufistic teaching, it's referred to as shirk. Shirk is seeing two-ness where there's only oneness. And we're going to play on this idea a lot today. Seeing two-ness where there's only oneness. That's why one of the greatest prayers of Islam or in Sufi teaching is La ilaha illa Allah. There is no God, only Allah. Okay? And again, if we're seeing or hearing this from our surface mind, maybe we're thinking terrorists or whatever bad vibe we get from our conditioned way of thinking. But if we were to look at the deeper teachings of this amazing tradition, there is no God, only Allah, basically means there is no separation. There's nothing that interferes with the one essence that is behind all appearances. Right? This is the core teaching. And so only breath, or only Allah, only the essence of the infinite, the holy, the compassionate, the beautiful, exists. Everything else is our own illusion. Okay? So here's Rumi. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. I am not an entity in this world or the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know, first, last, outer, inner, only that breath, breathing human being. So this teaching, like I said, requires us to leave the surface personality and enter into the depth. And when we enter into the depth, we let go of our meanings, our opinions, our concepts, our conjurings. And as a result of this surrendering and opening to the divine, we begin to feel that we're being breathed. We're being thought. We're being willed into existence by unseen forces that, remember, are not two, one. So we communicate as we let go of this surface personality, we communicate with this one beloved. See, when we're confused about who we are, the Sufis will actually say, when we turn our face away from God, because according to the Sufi teachings that Rumi embodies, we all have two faces. This is exactly what Jung was talking about. We all have two faces. We have a face turned towards the world, and we have a face turned towards God. When we have our face turned towards the world and we're paying attention to that face, it's what the Sufis will call the face of the West. And the reason why they call it the Western face is because the sun has set. There's no light. There's no God. And all we see are shadows. It doesn't mean that we're not looking for our beloved. That will always go on no matter which face we're paying attention to. We're endlessly seeking for the beloved. It's all we want. It's all we live for because it's the only thing that's animating us, breathing us into existence. That's all we want to feel is this connection to love and happiness and joy. When we're identified with this Western face, we're looking for it, but it's nowhere to be found. Everything is perishing when we look to the West. That's what it says in the Quran. Everything is perishing except his face, except the face of the beloved. So when we look out as the Western face or the surface personality, all we see is death, temporality. And so there's no happiness here. There's no beloved that can be found here. We might have glimpses and tastes, but these are only signs, and in hopes that these signs will point us back to look for where the beloved can truly be found. And that is turning towards the east, being willing to go into your own depths, purifying yourself from all of your magical conjurings and fantasies and opinions, relinquishing what's in the way, relinquishing what insists on seeing separation and two-ness. Right? And so any religion will get you there. Sufi, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, Zen. But you're not the system. It's like, they actually have this saying in Zen, Zen is like soap. You put soap on, which is grease, to get off the other dirt that you have on your body. So without the soap, you can't get that dirt off. But then once you have lathered up, used the system the way it was designed, then you rinse both off. Zen goes away as well as the dirt. That's why Rumi's saying, I have no origin story. I don't exist. He's been fully cooked. Right? And for most of us, that's only potential. We have to, like Rumi did, turn away from death and head towards life. And as Jesus said, that way is narrow, and few find it. And the only reason why few find it is because we're still enamored and intoxicated with the idols of the world, thinking that in these idols we will somehow, some way shirk the system and find the beloved in the finite. And, go see Dr. Phil when all of that starts to crumble away, and he'll ask you how it's going. So this is where the teachings call us to a higher aspiration. Right? So it's often said in these transformational teachings, these liberation teachings, that they're not for the weak. And it's not that there's an elitism there, but the reason why they're not for the weak is because you have to want to wake up above all else. Again, another Zen phrase is, unless you're like a person whose head is being held underwater, that person wants air above all else. If that's not how you feel about waking up and coming back home to God, to reality, you're really not ready for the path. The path opens up or appears to you when you've been completely devastated by everything that you've tried in the world. And the only reason why the path doesn't open up beforehand is because you're not looking for it. So here's another from Rumi along those lines. This one is entitled, My Worst Habit. My worst habit is I get so tired of winter. I become a torture to those I'm with. If you're not here, nothing grows. I lack clarity. My words tangle and knot up. How to cure bad water? Send it back to the river. How to cure bad habits? Send me back to you. When water gets caught in habitual whirlpools, dig a way out through the depths to the ocean. There is a secret medicine given only to those who hurt so bad they can't hope. The hopers would feel slighted if they knew. Look as long as you can at the friend you love, no matter whether that friend is moving away from you or coming back toward you. Keep looking for the friend. So in other words, then, when we enter the winter of our life, a wintry season in the cycle of our life, that means everything dies. Everything loses its vitality. You actually see the world for what it really is. That's often triggered by an event, a situation, a crisis that actually snaps you out of the magical dream of thinking that you can find what you're looking for in the world. When you realize that everything that you've invested hope in has come to nothing or has passed away, and you're truly hopeless, then the way will open. Right? He says it so perfectly. How to cure bad water, send it back to the river. How to cure bad habits, send me back to you. When you're stuck in your hopelessness, this is bad water. And you're stuck in your hopelessness because of bad habits. The only way to cure bad habits is to allow your life energy, your attention, your desire to flow back into your own depths. Then you will undergo a purification in the great sea of the divine's presence. You'll come into a place where you can stretch out, relax, and be at home. And all of that debris and cloudiness and confusion will go away in the silence of that rest. And something else will come into your awareness, which is the rhythm of the ocean. That divine breath that is moving the waves of the ocean, including you. And it's only because of these whirlpools of bad habit that we're blocking them out. And again, don't forget Rumi's words. There is a secret medicine given only to those who hurt so hard they can't hope. That is when you're open to healing. Where we're going in A Course in Miracles this morning is chapter 8, which is entitled The Undivided Will to Heal. Undivided will means, above all else, I'm done. I give up. I have no hope for the things in the world. So as this, conversation is going on, do your own inner inventory. Check and see these dissenting voices, this chorus of egoic thinking that's going to come in and disagree with what's going on. And I would take the stance of the Buddha in this situation by saying, don't believe me. Don't believe anything I'm saying. Listen to those voices. Give them a fair and unbiased listening. And see what they're really telling you. And discern where that path will lead. And if you find that that experience is better and more promising than the experience that we're cultivating in this conversation, by no means feel forced or coerced into listening to this. But maintain your awareness throughout and see where those voices have taken you. Do a little self-reflection and see if you've followed those voices before in the past and where have they ended you up. Okay? So this is a very elementary and necessary step on the path, is to discern, again, this one way. They actually call it the doctrine of two ways. It shows up in every teaching. There is the way home, and then there's the way into oblivion. And that's it. You can dress it up and multiply it in a number of forms and voices, but either the voice is directing you home or the voice is directing you towards oblivion, right? East or west. A couple more from Rumi. So here's a quick prose, brief. There is a way between voice and presence where information flows. In disciplined silence, it opens. With wandering talk, it closes. I'll read that again. There is a way between voice and presence. Voice is, you're hearing a voice right now. Right? Now, again, you're discerning the quality of the voice. What is this voice speaking to you of? If it's speaking to you of truth, the voice will lead you towards presence. And when you listen to that voice, it opens you to a different way of listening and being, where you can actually begin to pick up your own information. You begin to plug in to your deeper intuition and insight. And then he says, this is only accessible to those who can quiet the inner noise. Disciplined silence shows you the gate opens. Wandering talk closes the gate. Maybe you've had these experiences before where you're in such a state of quietude, meditation, communion, and then you have to, the phone rings and you pick it up, and immediately you can feel this drop or this change in vibration, a different environment where there was the open gate and now there's the closed gate. You can experience this in a number of ways. But the idea is this gate is opening or closing depending on our listening. What are we listening for? And then finally here. Dissolver of sugar, dissolve me if this is the time. Do it gently, with a touch of a hand or a look. Every morning I wait at dawn. That's when it's happened before. Or do it suddenly, like an execution. How else can I get ready for death? You breathe without a body, like a spark. You grieve, and I begin to feel lighter. You keep me away with your arm, but the keeping away is pulling me in. So what Rumi's getting at here is the famous Sufi statement that you have to die before you die. In order to prepare for death, you as the separate self have to undergo a death process. Dying to the self and the world that you've known. Dying to that Western face of reality, or unreality, really. And so that will open up the gate. When above all else you have no hope, you'll find the secret medicine. And the secret medicine, remember, the way to life is narrow because the cost, as Jesus tells us in the Gospels, is your life. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you give your life for my sake, you'll find it. Same principle. Die before you die. In order to enter the kingdom of the heart, you have to be born again. You have to die to this world and come to a state of true awakening within this inner state or heart knowledge. So one of the things that comes up, and I kind of sense it vibrationally, maybe it's only from me, is when we get on this spiritual path, right? Remember, it's meeting us wherever we are. When we get on this spiritual path, we're often entranced by the idea that, okay, I couldn't find what I wanted in the world, but God will give it to me. I'll be able to have the perfect life. I'll find the perfect partner. I'll manifest the money. This law of attraction kind of a thing. And I'll have divine blessing as a result. So we get on this path for what's in it for me. In one way, shape, or form. Even if it's, I'll get enlightened. And when you truly get on the path, it's not long after the honeymoon period, because we often have this honeymoon period where it's fantastic. Everything's connecting. This is amazing. I didn't realize there was this secret life. It's so beautiful. And you're getting a taste of the divine sugar, the honey. But then it gets to the point where if you really want to go to where this is sourced, it's going to require everything that you are. You have to give everything for it. And that means first and foremost that you have to look at everything that you've been using to stay separate from it. And that is your life, your desires, your agenda, your plans, the way that you look for and are in your relationships. Everything gets put on the chopping block because it all needs to be for God, right? For the divine. It's all his or hers, whatever way you want to look at it. That means you have to surrender everything and die before you die. So if your only motivation was, what's in it for me, you're gone. That's what Hafiz says. It's like as soon as you get that message, you're out of town. You're hightailing it. But if you are, again, that's why he says when you've come to the place where you're in crisis, there's no hope. It's kind of like Charlie and his grandpa when they went to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right? Those who had things in the world and they were really well established and full of themselves, they were all bickering about signing this contract, right? I don't know if you remember it, and had all this fine print. And I remember watching this when I was going through a real dark night of the soul. And for some reason, it made me burst out in tears because when it was time for Charlie and his grandpa to sign it, Charlie goes to his grandpa and says, "Grandpa, should we sign it?" And he looks at Charlie and says, "What do we got to lose?" And that's where you have to be. You have to be, as Charlie and his family were, so broken and poor. Knowing you have nothing, knowing you are nothing. That's why the wealth and pleasures of the world can often blur our vision. Until you realize you are and have nothing, you're not going to find that medicine. So this is A Course in Miracles, the unconflicted curriculum. He says, knowledge will be restored to you when you meet its conditions. This is not a bargain made by God, who made no bargains at all. It is merely the result of your misuse of his laws on behalf of a will that was not his, or a self that is not his. So in other words, as long as we are on the surface, being the ego, we're literally swimming in an ocean of love. It's the only breath that's breathing all of life. It's the abundant life. It's the divine life. But we can't see it. We see through our closed, sleeping eye our fantasies, our desires, what we want. So he's saying here, it's not a bargain that God's trying to make with you. It's that you're listening to a voice that isn't his. You're in shirk. You're in duality. You're following the voice of other gods, right? And as a result, you're finding only what you are in everything that you're seeing in the world, and that is nothing. So then he says, the distraction of the ego seems to interfere with your learning this path, but it has no power to distract you unless you give it power. So this is why when the ego has been brought to its knees through crisis of sickness, loss of a loved one, divorce, just despair of any kind, usually the voice of the ego is broken at that point, and it can't tempt you with its conjurings. Then you're open to hearing another voice. That's why he's saying the ego's voice has no power over you unless you're listening for it and wanting it. When you want to go home above all else, the ego's voice won't appeal to you at all. He says the ego's voice is a hallucination. So keep that in mind too when Rumi says that the door can only open in the state of disciplined silence. Right? When we're listening to the ego's voice, which is the chattering talk, the door closes. So as long as we're going on in our own meanderings in our head, listening to our own voice, even a voice of, where's that sound coming from? Is that somebody's phone? So everything either gets put through the voice of the ego, or you have a disciplined silence to shut it out. Nothing can distract you or tempt you if you don't want it. So the ego's voice is a hallucination. You cannot expect the ego to tell you, I'm not real. So in this statement, the ego is the self that you think you are. You can't expect, or I can't expect John to say, John's not real. Chuck's not real. You can't expect the ego to say it's not real. It's trying to be you and take all of your attention and lead you out into the world and stay there. Don't go home. But if you're unwilling to follow that voice, if you're unwilling to stay as the surface personality, you'll begin to change your direction. So he says, before we get to the changing of direction, he says, hallucinations are inaccurate perceptions of reality, but you are not asked to dispel them alone. You are merely asked to evaluate them in terms of their results to you. That's what we were talking about earlier. Everything that John has told me to do has really ended up in me not being happy. Every time I've given up being John, I have found peace and happiness. John has tried to get on the spiritual path because there was something in it for John. John is a raging narcissist, as is every ego. It is looking for its own glory. It's looking for its own safety. It's looking for its own wealth and security and pleasure, despite everyone else. So every time I listen to John, I listen to a voice that's going to lead me towards unhappiness. So when I'm sane enough, I begin to evaluate what John has been giving me, and I begin to reject being John. As insane as that might sound to some of you, that you can actually reject being who you think you are. That's when this path opens. What else do you expect? It's another self and another world. It's going to cost you. But when you finally get to that table where you're going to surrender yourself and see what you're getting in place of yourself, it's an exchange of nothing for everything. And when you step through the gate onto the other side, having released who you're not and found who you are, you're going to be like, what took me so long to make this simple choice that has given me everything? So he says, if you don't want what the ego is offering you because it destroys your peace, they'll be removed. All of these offerings will be removed for you. See, that's the other thing, and I don't want to belabor this too much longer, but when you set on the path, once you make that choice to wake up for real, you're no longer alone. You now have the divine presence guiding you in everything. So now you're in communion with God, and you can cultivate that and deepen that. And when you no longer want the ego's offerings because they destroy your peace, God will be as quick as your choice to have them removed. And you'll see the effects showing up in your world. So that's finishing here with these ideas. He says, your past learning must have taught you the wrong things simply because it has not made you happy. That's how you know your past learning has failed you, because you're not perfectly at peace and perfectly happy in a state of perfect health right now. You're bearing the fruit of your own learning and what you believe as your state of mind right now. Evaluate that. Look at it. Do you want to continue being your own guide with your past learning that has brought you here, which is a perpetual state of lack? So he says, on this basis alone, the value of your past learning should be questioned. If learning aims at change and that is only its purpose, are you satisfied with the changes that your learning has brought you? Dissatisfaction with a learning outcome must be a sign of learning failure because it means that you did not get what you want. So that's why he says there's only one other alternative now. And he says it so perfectly. He says, resign now as your own teacher because you have taught yourself wrongly. You're not a fit guide for your life on this path. Right? Isn't that it? I could do it. Is it almost 9 o'clock? Got to get out of here. It's getting hot. So the curriculum of the atonement is the opposite of the curriculum you establish for yourself. Right? The atonement is this divine union. Every real path home is the atonement. Right? Doesn't matter the name. The curriculum of the atonement is the opposite of the curriculum you establish for yourself, but so is its outcome. If the outcome of your path or learning has made you unhappy, and if you want a different outcome, then you must change the curriculum. Isn't that obvious? The first change, he then says, that must be introduced is a change in direction. Stop going out into the world to get your needs met. Come home. Open that door and go into your depth and commune with your source. Pray. Open to the presence of God. Surrender your life to God. Cry upon God's altar, whatever it is that's going to make it click for you. Go home. Stop wandering. He says a meaningful curriculum cannot be inconsistent. So if you're trying to be the ego and go home to God, it's going to confuse your mind. And you'll be trying to go in two different directions at the same time. So it always comes down to the simple fact that in every moment you get quiet and surrender. Open to grace. Give up your agenda. Surrender your plans. And watch what happens. Because here's what the ego wants you to think. If you surrender your agenda and your desire to get your needs met, you're never going to be happy because God's this stale, stuffy, religious idea. And you want the pith and gusto of life. No, God is the only breath of life, not stale and stuffy. You want love. God will give you the love that you want. But you have to give him who you are. So this is how we're going to end it today. So this is a book on Sufism, and right along these lines of what we're talking about right here, he says the actual path of Sufism, A Course in Miracles, whatever way you're following that's legit, it entails a process of inner transformation whereby the powers of your soul or consciousness are turned toward God. That's the path. You turn your attention towards the divine. And what you begin to want to see are the signs of God showing up in your life. If you want to see that, those veils will be lifted and you'll begin to see the signs of his guidance in everything you're doing wherever you are. Watch it. And what's really sometimes fascinating and unsettling, is if you begin to want to see the veils lift and you're bringing God's voice into your awareness, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go out on this date now with this woman or this guy. And you're sitting there at the table, and now because your inner ears are open, you're like, oh my God, this was what I was actually looking for. It's kind of crazy. You know, and sometimes, and this has happened to me early in my, journey, like you almost get to see like the face of evil through the other person because that's what you were looking for. It begins to show you your lust, your shame, your hatred. It begins to show up. You begin to see it. The veils lift. And you begin to recognize the right way and the wrong way very clearly. Right? So that's the inner transformation. You begin to turn towards God. And as you begin to turn towards God, the qualities of love, compassion, joy, peace become part of your character. You begin to imbibe those qualities. You begin to feel them and want them. And as a result of that, your relationships begin to reflect them. Okay, final thoughts here. So he says here that the self undergoes annihilation at every moment, but the face of God subsists. So in every moment, who we think we are is actually disappearing. And we just keep bringing it back as this whirlpool of habit that Rumi was talking about. If we, like Rumi said, let those dirty waters go back into the sea, we will realize that every moment the self is flashing into being and then being given back to its source. Every moment it's being breathed out as a gift of grace. God is gifting me the self, and in return, I'm surrendering it all back to him. Gives it back to me, I give it back to him. And in this divine pulse or dance, I am and I am not at the same time. And I grow and brighten and expand in this constant annihilation and subsistence. And I find that there's the joy. Because what I was looking to do all the while was disappear in love and come back to the awareness of love. That's what's going on when we allow this process its fullness. So we're going to have to end it there. And speaking about giving all that we are, the blue bag is going to go around. The church and I thank you for your generous donations. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, remember you can click that link below and donate to the 8 a.m. service. We thank you for that. Link is coming. Any thoughts, reflections, questions? Blessing the offering, charging it with the intention that it bring light and peace to all hearts and minds, whatever form it may take. And so it is. Amen. Okay. Seal the deal. You can rise. And coming into the settled and quiet space of the heart. And we give thanks to all the teachers, prophets, guides, and avatars who reveal this path who open to our awareness the way to true and everlasting life and peace and happiness, so that we too, when we come home, may know that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a beautiful Sunday. Thank you. Course in Miracles tomorrow night, if you're willing. Above all,